Johnson, and I'm a sexologist and a counselor in training. What do I wish more people knew about sex? I think that I wish that more men kind of knew. I wish that more men had better cliteracy. And what I mean by that is I think that our culture downplays the role of the clitoris in sex for women. You know, in porn, you just see a lot of straight, immediate penis penetration, vagina, and women are getting off, or they're pretending to get off that way. But in reality, less than 25% of women get off with just vaginal penetration. Less than 25%. And around 80 to 90% of the women, when they're masturbating, they aren't penetrating themselves. Even if they have a vibrator that's like a dildo shape, they're using the outside only. So I think if more men knew a bit more about the intricacies of the clitoris, the world would be a way better place. For starters, that it's not just a little nub or like a bean at the, you know, it's not just a little tiny piece of an organ. It has a three-dimensional shape, you know, it's round and has kind of two little horns that come down from it. So that's why our labia are really sensitive. You know, there's a clitoris right underneath that. So I think a lot more men could be getting women off better if they were focusing on simultaneously paying attention to the clitoris and also, you know, the sex that they're having too. Well, for how much we know about the penis and how many millions of dollars have been spent researching how to keep those things up, it should shock you that we really only knew about the three-dimensional shape of the clitoris in 2008, 2009. That's pretty disappointing, but at least we're moving forward. People just don't really realize the extent of this organ and the fact that it's, you know, a homolog, or, you know, almost the same thing as a penis. It just differentiates, you know, and looks a little bit different, but it gets pumped with blood, just like a penis. It becomes, you know, turgid and erect, just like a penis. It is, you know, as sensitive. It has thousands more nerve endings, even though it's smaller, you know, than the head of a penis. I think another thing that people don't know about the clitoris is that it continues to grow throughout a woman's life. So this idea that older women are like cougars and just wiser and want sex more, maybe that's, you know, there's some truth to that, but it could also just be that when a woman is in her 30s, late 20s, her clitoris is about 4 times larger than it was when she hit puberty in her teens. So there's just a lot more to work with. So the porn question is an interesting one. I get this all the time, and unfortunately, like most of my answers, it depends. There are healthy ways to use porn and further your relationship and, you know, have fun. But I think the key to remember is that in this country, in America, porn is made, created, produced, directed, you know, everything is done by men. So it's really missing half of the voice entirely. And, you know, men end up getting their sex education a lot of times, especially in the South where we are. They end up getting their sex education from porn. And so they're getting an education about women's bodies from a perspective created entirely by men. So I think that's what we have to be careful about in porn. Not necessarily like, oh, like don't let people have porn or they'll get addicted. Just like maybe get more women's voices involved so that the full real story is portrayed in ways that like give both genders more naturalistic depictions of sex. I think some issues in terms of arousal between the genders come up in this area with initiating sex, that's probably one of the most frequently asked questions. You know, I just have guys that are like, how do I always come onto my woman and know she's gonna say yes? And the answer is that you're not. There's not always one way to do it. It's super context dependent for women. With men, if you think about our sexual circuitry as kind of like a gas and brake system, like a car, men have way more sensitive accelerator pedals, or gas, you know, and women have way more sensitive brakes in our nervous systems. So it's way easier for guys to get ramped up and harder for them to stop, and way harder for women to get ramped up and way easier to put the brakes on. So I think the best advice for men in terms of cultivating contexts which will, you know, produce likely, you know, reciprocation of you know, sexual advances, is to remember that the woman's nervous system has to be totally relaxed, you know, and also that, you know, as Esther Perel says, foreplay starts as soon as an orgasm finishes, you know. It's not just, oh, you see your wife cooking in the kitchen, you walk up behind her and grab her ass and expect her to be like, ooh, yeah, let's fuck right here, right now. Like, you maybe would have more luck if you had walked up behind her and, you know, whispered, just barely grazing her neck. It's times like these that I just see how sexy you are. It makes me want you so much. And then walk away. That might be way more arousing than just that, meh, you're hot. It's like caveman. We gotta, like, I think in general, another thing that porn has kind of contributed to is tropes in sexual narratives that are just a little tasteless. So for instance, when men fantasize, their fantasies are way more visual. The actions leading up to intercourse happen way faster. Women are less visual. They focus more on the characteristics of their partner, and there's way, way more foreplay and more time leading up to the act, you know, and focus on like words and not so much just visual images. Which is also so hilarious, you know, given this social idea that penis size is so meaningful. Like, I think men might imagine like women like picturing a cock or something when they're fantasizing, because men would, you know, imagine the parts of a woman because they're very visual, but that's definitely not what most women are thinking about when they're fantasizing. Definitely not. In terms of fantasy, I think that a lot of people in this country have a lot of shame around their fantasy and their masturbatory practices, because there's kind of a misconception about how fantasy operates with our sexuality, you know? So, for instance, I think the biggest misconception I always hear is male clients or male friends of mine feeling really embarrassed about having fantasies of being submissive, of being restrained or tied up or dominated. And in reality, like, most fantasies help us be okay with getting off. And so that means kind of negating what we call pathogenic beliefs, or just these kind of beliefs that we grow up having, you know, we learn from our primary caregivers. So, you know, a man might come to watch his dad be really aggressive with mom and beat up on mom even, and he might come to have the pathogenic belief that, you know, women are fragile and they can get hurt, and men are going to take advantage and they're going to be aggressive and they're going to hurt women. So that man, in his fantasy, to make it safe for him to be aroused, he might want to be all tied up and unable to move because there's no way that he could hurt that woman, you know, if he's immobilized. So it's not oh, you're a pussy, you have these fantasies of, you know, being dominated and you're, you know, a wimp and a sissy. It's, you feel like you're too strong and you might hurt a woman, so you need to be restrained from doing that, you know? Same thing with women. A lot of times, women who have fantasies of submission are big old powerful feminists. You know, these girls and women are frequently really confused why they have fantasies of maybe being gangbanged or even, you know, rape fantasies or just straight domination and discipline. Like, they don't understand why they're, you know, having these sorts of fantasies. But in reality, it's more to do with the fact that they might have a pathogenic belief that women are hella strong, that they might emasculate a man, or they might be too powerful for one man, you know, so that's where you see gangbang fantasies kind of come into play. If there's multiple men, there's no way that she can overpower them. Same thing with being restrained. If you like are worried about emasculating someone or being too powerful for them, if you're tied up or handcuffed, you can't do that. So I think just talking about our fantasies with our partners can really, really deepen our relationships. And when we start learning more about ourselves and, you know, kind of the roots of these fantasies, you realize that it's not shameful at all, you know? I think one of the first sex myths that comes to mind is the notion that women really want a massive penis, like women only want giant cocks, which is just not true at all. And I think you have the porn industry largely to thank for that misconception, because I hear so many men being concerned about cock size, and technically, like, the average G-spot's about 2 inches or less in. So you don't need much to, like, rock most women's worlds. But I think, you know, culture has made men think they need this, like, behemoth, gigantic, like, penis. And a lot of times I hear women say that it's, like, not even that pleasurable. Like, women would prefer someone who knows how to drive their penis as opposed to someone with just a massive one. And I think some big sex myths, I mean, as soon as we start out with sex in this culture, we immediately encounter sex myths. The myth that hymens break, or that your cherry pops, you know, when you lose your virginity. If you're having pain when you're losing your virginity, the guy hasn't turned you on enough, or there's not enough lube. That's, you know, it's probably just a little bit of vaginal tearing, but there's not, like, some sort of, like, freshness seal that's, like, popping when you lose your virginity. So that's definitely a big myth. And it's a myth that is really impactful for a lot of women's lives around the globe. Virginity testing leads to all types of problems for women in all different countries. You know, this idea that somehow you can look at a woman's genitals and know for sure, you know, it's like a freshness seal, as though women were pieces of property, and you can verify the freshness of this with some sort of piece of anatomy. It's just not true. And, you know, even the Bible, it was perfectly okay for a husband who inspected his wife and thought she wasn't a virgin to waltz her straight back to her dad's door, where she would be stoned to death by her own family. It's in the Bible. So there's huge implications that come out of, you know, almost personification or metaphoric use of anatomy parts. It's really silly. Gender stereotypes. That's a good question. So, a gender stereotype issue that I've been personally encountering a lot, and I've been hearing from a lot of women and female clients, especially in their late 20s, kind of up to mid-30s, is that you kind of, on the outset of dating, the male in the context will say something along the lines of, like, you know, just so you know, like, I just want to be friends, like, I want to be clear, like, you know, and the underlying assumption in that, which is, like, kind of gross, is like, oh, you're a woman, you like obviously want to be in a long-term relationship only. So let me clarify that that's like off the table. And a lot of time we're like, hey, sweet thing, like you're lovely, like do not get me wrong. But like I do not want a relationship either. Like I want to like be free and single just like you. I think there's this assumption that, you know, just left over from our kind of 50s heritage in this country that women don't want the same things sexually that men do. And, you know, to quote Nancy Friday, men and women want exactly the same thing. And she studied fantasy and thousands of people. Men and women want exactly the same thing, to be done to. You know, everyone wants that just unbridled desire from another person, like aimed right at you. And, you know, that's one of the first things that I'll tell female clients who whose partners report that they don't feel like their partner's really into them. Like, girl, I mean, I wouldn't talk to a client this way, but, you know, basically, girl, take that cock and rub it all over your face and let him see you smiling, see that cock paired with that smile and, like, how much it's desired. I think, like, that's the thing that women don't always realize is that there's, like, almost a weird shame for, you know, genitalia in men, just like there is for, you know, female genitalia. Like, men want to just know that it's wanted and desired and not gross, or, you know, there's so many pathogenic beliefs that men grow up with in this country that women don't like sex and that it's, you know, men only want it and they push it on women or all of that good stuff. I think one big myth about sex is just that there is a huge gender difference when it comes to our sexual functioning. And yeah, that's true. Like, how we're wired, you know, on our nervous system, it's a little different, but we find again and again there to be kind of bigger differences between groups, like between men and between women, than we do between men and women. The simple truth is that men are empathic and have feelings, and women really like sex and enjoy getting off just like men. You know, until about 12 weeks in utero, we look exactly the same. We have the exact same parts. They just take on a differentiation of function, you know, about 12 weeks in, when if you're going to become a boy, there's a testosterone wash, you know, and you have a scrotum that fills out with testicles, and women, you just see, you know, labia that don't end up filling out, but it's the exact same parts. Even in the language that we use, you can hear a bit of the sex myths. You know, people say men get hard and women get wet when they're turned on. But really, men and women both get hard and wet. You know, blood pumps into a penis just the same way that it pumps into a clitoris. So both of those organs get enlarged with blood. And we both have glands that produce, you know, fluids before sex. And so, you know, we call it pre-cum in guys. And women also get wet too. So this whole idea that you can tell if someone's turned on because a man's always hard and a woman's always wet, that's just also not true. Because we have, with women, there's what we call arousal discordance or non-concordance. And frequently, when women are reporting being aroused, they may not necessarily get wet. So I think that this myth that, like, if a woman's not dripping wet, she's, like, not into you, that's just not true at all. Why the Super Sex series? I think that in American culture today, there's a lot of information, you know, be it online or on blogs, wherever. And I think people confuse information for knowledge. And so, I mean, even the information they're getting a lot of times is not very good because, you know, it's coming from places like BuzzFeed, where, you know, it's clickbait. It's made to draw people in for advertisements, so it's sensationalized. And so I think the Super Sex series will really help people kind of curate that information into workable, usable knowledge. And I think eventually that knowledge, once it's, used enough, becomes wisdom. And so ultimately, I think that would be, the process. You would see yourself getting information, using professionals through the Super Sex series to help you put that information in context and turn it into knowledge. And then you go and take that knowledge and practice with it, and it becomes wisdom.